it's all the same crisis, which is the collapse of globalization. It doesn't work anymore. And it manifests itself through the rise of commodity prices. That affects the poor, the world's poor first. When you live as half of the population does in Egypt on $2 a day, and the price of wheat, as it has, rises by 100% within the last year, it becomes extremely difficult to feed your children. And you saw in Tunis and in Cairo people actually carrying loaves of bread. This is not unknown within the developed world. 47 million Americans live in poverty. They're not spending half of their income on food, but they're now spending about 35%. When you see a rise in gasoline prices, which are going upwards in the United States and by all projections will continue to rise upwards above $4 a gallon, maybe $5 a gallon. This just affects every aspect of the economy, so that because agribusinesses ship most of their fruits and vegetables across country to the East Coast or up from the South, the transportation costs inevitably create a rise in food costs. So we have created a kind of global oligarchic elite, which is supranational. It owes no loyalty to any particular country. It has reduced the working class within the United States, within the developing world, to a level of almost subsistence existence. It tells workers that they have to be competitive on a global marketplace, which means they have to be competitive with sweatshop workers in Bangladesh or prison labor in China. So it's a reconfiguration by corporations of a global economy where the working and a beleaguered middle class are increasingly caught in a vice in which there is no escape. And you know, there are differences in terms of debt. I mean, Spain, for instance, doesn't have huge debt. Greece does. But I think the one commonality is that the system of globalization, of unfettered, unregulated corporate capitalism, doesn't work for the ordinary citizen. And that we are seeing ignite popular protest. I mean, the other thing about the Occupy movement is that it had the right target, which is Wall Street. At this point, Washington is an appendage of Wall Street. Wall Street is where power lies, both economic and political. And so it was a powerful movement because it articulated these two truths. You know, the idea of the 1%, the economic inequality, coupled with a targeting of where actual power lies. The Occupy movement has now felt the full wrath of the state. Their encampments have been physically eradicated. Without question, they have been heavily infiltrated. The tolerance that was espoused by the Occupy encampments, whereby everyone was welcome, has brought in elements such as black bloc anarchists who believe in spontaneous acts of violence, i.e. they cover their faces, they dress in black, they move as a mass, they see a car, they smash the windows, they taunt the police. And this is just a gift from heaven for the security state, because the power of the Occupy movement was that it spoke for the mainstream. And the state's goal is to sever the Occupy movement from the mainstream. So the Occupy movement has got to build walls. It's got to develop a kind of self-discipline. It's got to set standards which do not allow internal movements within the Occupy organization to sever itself from the mainstream. The threat of the Occupy movement in Zuccotti Park, and you were there, was that on weekends you had mothers from New Jersey with their kids with strollers. This terrified the state. Yeah. So the Occupy movement, they have to form agreements by which they can operate. And the second thing is that they have to begin to organize around very specific issues. I think if the Occupy movement organizes around raising the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage, to $10 an hour, it can galvanize around an issue. 70% of Americans, by the way, support a rise of the minimum wage. In order to keep labor with it, it has to latch onto issues such as the raising the minimum wage that will bring labor out into the street and keep the mainstream keep it as the kind of vanguard movement of the mainstream. Whether it can do that or not, I don't know. We'll have to see. I mean, the banks are playing some very dirty games. And the fact that we've not regulated the banks, the fact that we bailed out firms like Goldman Sachs and are in essence lending them free money, what's it, like 0, 1% interest or something, means they're all back to the speculative games, and that's what they are, games. They don't produce anything. They bet against things. I mean, one of the reasons the price of petrol is rising is because they're buying up futures and hoarding them, which is what they do with commodity prices, you know, basic staples of food, rice, and everything else. And we are headed for another implosion. And some of our most respected financial reporters, Gretchen Morgenson and others at the New York Times, are walking around saying this. We've done nothing to curb them. We have permitted the largest transference of wealth upwards in American history, the looting of the U.S. Treasury. The tragedy is that government, when the banks were on its knees, didn't step in. Instead of, for instance, taking $10 billion or $100 billion and creating regional banks, capitalizing those banks, leveraging them 10 to 1, loaning, you know, refinancing mortgages. I mean, there were all sorts of ways we could have used this kind of money constructively. We handed it off to a criminal class. Well, that's the problem. And it's gotten worse because after Citizens United in 2010, with the creation of these super PACs, and Obama broke a campaign promise by reaching out to a super PAC of his own. I mean, in a way, he has no choice because this money rules. And it has a pernicious effect not only on elections, but on the process of legislation. Because if you are an elected official and you do anything that angers corporate lobbyists and corporate power, then you know that the weight of that super PAC will sweep you out of office. And not only that, but that when you are under attack, you won't have a super PAC to appeal to. So it is essentially destroyed. I mean, it's all political theater. I mean, look at what the Republican debate is. What's it about? Moon colonies, according to Newt Gingrich. And when 13,000 people live on the moon, they can apply to be a state. You know, the fact is the personal narratives and personal opinions of political candidates do not matter. There is no way to vote in this country against the interests of Goldman Sachs. Obama is a more appealing political candidate because he's sane, but power, I mean, look, the Obama administration has carried out the policies of the George W. Bush administration, whether in terms of Wall Street, imperial projects, a failure to address the suffering of the working class, address the long-term unemployment crisis. We have cities now filing for bankruptcy, states that are talking about filing for bankruptcy, and the federal government is doing nothing except squandering $4 trillion on wars that we're going to lose, we're losing, and handing money over to a class on Wall Street that is complicitous in essentially hollowing the country out from the inside. Let's imagine how this sells in the Middle East, where we were Mubarak's great supporter. You know, I don't think anyone in the Muslim world thinks that we care much about human rights or democracy. We have, since the first Gulf War, planted military bases, some the size of small cities, all over the Middle East, Kuwait, Doha, UAE, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. So I think there's, at this point, absolutely no credibility, I'm talking about within the Middle East, when the United States claims that it would like to bring liberty or democracy to Syria. That said, the Assad regime, and I was there under his father, is a pretty repugnant and horrible regime. My feeling on Syria, and I'm not on the ground, and as a reporter, you know, I think that finally, for one to make those kinds of judgments, they have to be on the ground. But my feeling is that everything should be pushed through to create some kind of a ceasefire. I don't think so. I think the U.S. is so overextended, and I think that the situation in Syria is so messy. There is, you know, there's no real formal opposition. You know, it's a sort of a mess, and they just went through this in Libya, months and months. I have a hard time believing they do it again in Syria.